Appreciating Accessible Design by Matt Fellion of AbilityNet. Hello, my name is Matt. I'm an accessibility and usability consultant with AbilityNet. I specialize in accessibility audits, training, and reviews of content in multiple languages. Before I got into this field, I used to specialize in British literature. So while I'm going to give you some quick, simple tips today about accessible website design, I want to start by talking briefly about art. The history of art shows us that standards of beauty are not fixed. People have valued different characteristics at different times for different reasons. In Gothic literature or Romantic painting, for example, there's an appreciation for things that are broken, obscure, dark, terrifying, sublime, and vast beyond human comprehension, which might be desirable qualities in a good medieval ruin like Melrose Abbey, but not a travel booking website. I mention this to put into perspective the choices we make when designing for the web. Because if it's possible to find a broken building beautiful because it's broken, it's also possible to find an accessible website beautiful because it is accessible. It's possible to see principles of accessibility that hopefully we're familiar with: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, not just as standards to meet, but also as aesthetic values to appreciate and strive for. What would it mean to think about accessibility not just as an add-on that a well-designed website should have, but as intrinsically part of what makes a website well-designed? So tip number one, heading structure. You might be familiar with Joyce Kilmer's lines, "I think that I should never see a poem as lovely as a tree." Well, like a tree or a poem, a lovely web page should have a structure to it, and headings are crucial for communicating that structure. Headings help users navigate a page visually by showing how the parts of the page relate to each other. And they're also important when navigating with assistive technology, because it's possible to build up an understanding of the page as a whole by reviewing the list of headings and navigating between them. We can use a tool like the Headings Map extension to review the headings and check that the structure is meaningful. Typically, there will be a level 1 heading that tells users what the page is about. This often matches the page title. And then level 2 headings for the major sections, level 3 headings for subsections, and so on. This gives the parts of the page a nice logical relationship. Tip 2, contrast. Accessibility is not about avoiding color. Now, not everybody perceives color or perceives color the same way, so we should make sure we're not using color as the only way to convey any particular bit of information. But color is a great way to supplement and enhance meaning, as well as contributing to the look of a site. When designing the color palette for a site, we should keep in mind contrast, and by this we mean the relative brightness of different pieces of content, such as text on its background. It can be tempting to go for subtle color designs, where foregrounds and backgrounds both have a middling brightness, but this can make the content hard to read. So we'd encourage bold choices: light foregrounds, dark backgrounds, or dark foregrounds and light backgrounds. We can use a tool like ColorSafe to plan out in advance which colors will work together. If you go to colorsafe.co, colorsafe.co, you can enter a background color, and the tool will generate a selection of foreground colors that have good contrast with it. So you can build up a palette of colors that go well together and then deploy them across the design. Tip 3, just as it's tempting to be subtle with color, it's also tempting to be minimalist when labeling components. For example, we might label buttons with discrete icons instead of text. But does that magnifying glass mean search or zoom? With input fields, we might use placeholder text that disappears when users start to type into the field. But what if that's the moment when the user needs to be reminded what they're being asked to input? So this is another area where we'd encourage you to design boldly and explicitly. Use icons, but also text labels so that the meanings reinforce each other. Let components be proud about what they are and what they do, whether that's edit, submit, or print. Label input fields with text labels that stay put, where users can refer to them as they type into the fields. Thank you so much for listening to these 3 simple tips for accessible website design. And remember, accessible websites can and should be aesthetically pleasing ones, but let's leave the darkness and obscurity in the Gothic ruins. Learn about AbilityNet's accessibility services at abilitynet.org.uk/accessibility-services.